Right, so today we're going to be talking about the episode I did with Will Aitken. Will's actually a great friend of mine. Interestingly, with him, I'd met him lots of times remotely over Zoom because he lives in Canada and he came to London for the first time, and we recorded in person. So I'm sure many of you have had those relationships with the world that we're living in. Some really interesting topics came up. I think some of the things we can talk about in the summary is like setting boundaries between your personal and professional life, cancel culture, which came up, and social media addiction. But we'll start with that first one around like setting boundaries. I think, and this goes a little bit into last week's episode with Christine Armstrong, is with the world we're living in, especially if a lot of you are working remotely, it becomes more difficult to separate your work life and your personal life. So obviously Will was talking about when he first started gaining traction, doing very well in his professional career, he kind of got addicted to this process of content creation, and he was getting all these followers. And that was obviously great for his career, but it was actually having a very negative effect on his family. And he wasn't being present with his kids, right? So essentially, even if he was there with his kids, he was materially there, but he wasn't spiritually there because, he's got his kid in one arm and he's scrolling through social media on the other. So often it's all about the presence that we have with our loved ones. And I know that was, if you want to check out one of our old episodes with Sam Flynn, she's actually a social media addiction consultant. And interestingly enough, the reason she decided to do that job is she went through a similar situation where she was with her children, but she was scrolling through social media and they said, "Oh, why do you spend so long on your phone and on social media?" It was a real wake-up call on that. And Will obviously went through that process as well. But what did he do? What are the solutions? Because I think many of us, we all have, I would say, social media addiction to some extent. If we're using social media, it's kind of how those platforms are really set up to make you scroll. Unfortunately, I don't think the solution is just to delete social media. A lot of the times it can be, if you are able to do that because you don't need it for your work or staying in touch with friends or whatever it is, that's a great solution. But most of us, people like Will, we kind of need it. I need it, for example, to promote this podcast. So what can you do is you can set boundaries. So what Will did is he wasn't going to use social media after a certain time. And he talks about how he had certain nights with his wife where even though they can't actually go out that much because they've got young children and they can't get babysitters and they're in quite a remote place, they had evenings where when the kids have gone to bed, they're having dinner together, they're dressing up, they're pretending they're having a date night, but they're actually at home, which I thought was quite cute. And then just cool in terms of that, setting those boundaries. So I think setting boundaries is really important when it comes to that, professional and personal life. And yeah, I've definitely found the same as well. I've caught myself when I'm running a business, working really late, checking LinkedIn on my phone, all these things which are not that useful, but definitely like setting boundaries. What I've done is I do use LinkedIn, but I use it on my laptop. So I don't actually have LinkedIn on my phone. And that's really good because, 6, 7 o'clock, whenever it is, I shut down LinkedIn, I shut down my laptop. And even email, things like email on your phone. So instead of checking my work emails or LinkedIn at like 9 p.m. at night, I'm just relaxing and I'm with my partner, Anna, or my family or friends or whoever it is. So similar to what Will said, setting boundaries has been very useful for me. Tom, I know you're obviously in a very different setting to most of us. You're over in Colombia, in Medellin, but obviously you're running a business as well. I don't know, like, have you set boundaries for yourself, or have you even needed to set boundaries given what you're doing?
No, for sure. I mean, the easiest one for me is just turning the phone off. I mean, when the phone is turned off and when the computer's turned off, well, there's nothing really else to do. Then you're going to be present in the actual 3D world rather than the 2D world. And usually as soon as I'm done with things, because messages, as we all know, arrive the whole time, but it's very, very rare that a message at 7 p.m. at night can't wait until 8:30 the next morning. So for me, I mean, that's really the key. I always sleep with my internet off. I always sleep with my phone off. And that just makes it simple. I mean, and then when having lunch, we need to take a break from the 2D world. So it's it's just about that. When I eat, no phone. When I sleep or before bed, no phone. First thing in the morning, so first thing we do is lean over and grab the phone. Just don't have the phone in the bedroom. You can't do that. And, get up and, don't turn it on until after you've had breakfast or done some exercise or whatever that may be for you. That's how I've gone about it in the last 3 years.
Yeah, I really like what you said around like actually turning it off as well. When you're going to sleep, I think that's a great one. And some may say, oh, I've got an alarm clock, whatever, you can buy a physical alarm clock. That's what I ended up doing. And then, when you're eating as well, I see it all the time where I'm out, and I've been guilty of this myself, is like couples are there and they're just scrolling through their phone, and they're meant to be having a date night and conversing and getting out the house and the routine, like we talked about with Christine Armstrong, but they're actually not present with each other. Like both of them are there scrolling on their phones. So yeah, Anna and I, my partner, we try to do the same. And when we go out, not take our phones. So I think that's really useful. And I do think sometimes, obviously, we used to live in a world where there weren't mobile phones, right? And people managed to get by. And it just made me think of a conversation. I don't have kids yet, so I can't empathize in this way. But I remember speaking to a couple friend of mine, and the woman was saying, who's a mother, I always keep my phone on in case there's like an emergency at night if I'm like away from my child. But I think in that case, it was like the husband is looking after the child, and there's got to be that level of trust that if my husband's with the child, that he's going to take care of any problems, right? So it's like, when you do have the situation where you're relaxing, you're away from your children, there's got to be that level of trust. And I think of the analogy with a business, which is the same. Like, I'm actually, after this, we're recording this, I'm going to Spain, to Ibiza for 10 days. And I've got to have the level of trust with my team that they're going to look after stuff so that I can just shut off my laptop and relax. Otherwise, it's not relaxing if I'm like checking into my emails and all that stuff. So yeah, you've definitely got to also delegate in a way. I think that's going to help you think, oh, I can shut off my phone because this thing, which maybe needs ongoing support, there's someone else dealing with that, essentially. But yeah, I wanted to come on to as well, and I think this isn't just the thing with social media. So with social media addiction, we talked about kind of, say in the case of Will, you're with your kids, or say in the case of myself, I'm maybe like 9 p.m. I'm scrolling through LinkedIn, and I'm meant to be chatting with Anna or watching TV, whatever it is, right? And focusing on that thing versus, social media. Now, often, a lot of the time, what we're doing is we're subconscious or unconsciously doing it versus consciously doing it. And I think this is an important thing to think about, not just with social media, but in life in general. Are you doing things consciously? And obviously this term consciousness, everyone's looking into, no one really understands what consciousness is exactly, or where it comes from a spiritual perspective. But I think we all understand when we're proactively, mentally paying attention to something versus we're subconsciously doing it. And it's like we're a robot. And the way I describe it, and I'm sure many of you have heard this analogy, is like when you get in a car and you go from like A to B, and you get there and you're like, oh, I don't know how I got here. And that was a 30-minute journey, because you've done it loads of times if it's a commute or something like that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing when you're getting in a car, but it is a really bad thing when you're with other people and you're meant to be giving them your attention, but you're obviously somewhere else, like subconsciously, you're in like a different element almost. And that, I think this really comes down to being present. And it's not just being present with family members, like we talked about in Will Aitken's case, or my case, or anyone. I think we can always do a better job with other people, but also being conscious with yourself, right? Of being like, why am I just scrolling through YouTube? Why am I just scrolling through LinkedIn? Why am I watching this TV? Did I even make the conscious decision to sit down and watch this TV show? Did I make the conscious decision to like eat this food, or did I just walk past the place? And then I think a good example, actually, when we had Amranata Roby on, who was a Buddhist monk, he was talking about like when you go into the supermarket, often you're making decisions there subconsciously because you mean to go in and buy one thing and you end up buying other things because it's to do with like advertising and all these things. We're saying, especially in the city, right? your senses are constantly being attacked. So it's good to be aware of, am I doing things consciously or am I doing them subconsciously? But yeah, I imagine, Tom, with your work and ayahuasca ceremonies and all these things, I imagine this is a topic you probably looked at as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just firstly touching on that Amarobi example, I find it interesting. I'm one of those like suckers for health shops that sell natural products, and I go in to just want one thing and I end up walking out with 10 different things, and it's just like the packaging is just like improve your sleep, and I just go away, my sleep's fine, but yeah, I'm just like, oh wow. So no, it's interesting you brought that up again. But yeah, with the ceremonies that we do, I mean, presence really is it. We're talking, it doesn't really matter what variety of spirituality, if that's a thing, whether it's Eastern, Western, ancestral medicine, South American, Latin American, which tends to focus more on plant medicine. But I don't think there's one form of spirituality that doesn't have presence at the very center of it. And almost as a, yeah, because, if we're doing a ceremony and suddenly, well, we drift off into space and forget who's about, then, with some of these medicines that we work with, you have to be there, you have to be taking care of people sometimes. And well, if you're in outer space and you don't realize, then it can cause problems. So it's kind of like, if you want to work in this world, it's not really an optional extra. It's the presence that we have to bring to every ceremony.
Yeah. 100%. And even, something like meditation, which helps you if you do ayahuasca, if you're kind of like meditating and being present, that helps you. And all meditating on is focusing on your breath right now, like in the present moment, right? Bit of a left field topic that Will got onto, but I knew he wanted to discuss this, so I wanted to talk to him about it. Was cancel culture, and he was talking about an incident where someone had essentially tried to cancel him. And what I liked about Will's reaction, and I think this goes into a topic we've discussed before, is like, how do you react to things? Is Will reacted in a situation where this person was essentially doing one of, I guess, the worst things you can do to someone. And Will said, fair enough, which is sometimes people should deserve to be cancelled in a way because they've done crimes that are so heinous, right? And I guess in a way that's not really, I wouldn't call that cancelling, Will called it cancelling, but we have law and order for that. And I'm not an anarchist. I do think you do need those laws when people do certain crimes. But in general, the society we have at the moment, people are being cancelled in inverted commas for things that, they wouldn't have been, should we say, like 10 to 20 years ago. So anyway, with Will, because someone hadn't participated in a group where this guy was trying to cancel someone else because they said this company that Will was in the space of was like homophobic, sexist, racist, whatever it is. But instead of saying, hey, these are some things I think you need to work on, he was saying this company needs to be shut down, it's terrible, etc., and was trying to vilify them on social media. And all Will said is, no, I don't think that's the right way to go about it. I think DM the person, have a conversation in private. And I think that's the way to go about these things. And again, what Will did, he didn't react in a certain way. He didn't go angry, go crazy at this person, but he just tried to react in a very calm way. So I think obviously in the society that we're living in, cancel culture, and let's forget cancel culture, because I know some people get annoyed with the word cancel, like what does that even mean? But like the polarization, and that, I think another way of looking at cancel culture is when someone disagrees with you on a topic, oh, I'm going to cancel them from my life. But we need to have conversations. Again, these conversations is if you're disagreeing with someone that has different religious beliefs to you, political beliefs, opinions, even with your partner, right? If you're that type of person that gets angry and offended very easily, you're probably not going to have very good relationships, because every couple is always going to disagree on certain things, right? So it's all about when you're having disagreements, how do you react to those? And again, it's not saying let's sweep them under the carpet, but let's have a conversation around them and let's do it in a calm manner. And I think the kind of examples Will gave, he was able to do that quite well. But yeah, I know, Tom, you're like in a very remote part of Colombia, so probably like polarization, cancel culture, all that thing, probably a little bit separated from what we have over here in the West. But I don't know what your thoughts are on the topic.
No, completely the same. I mean, I think you've summed it up perfectly. Obviously, there has to be some limits. You can't just go around, being a complete and utter moron spreading hate. But it's, yeah, as I say here, I'm not really a big news follower, and I live, in remote Colombia, so I don't see it so much. But I think the way Will went about it was fantastic, and instead of lighting there was a small fire hit there, and instead of throwing a load more wood onto it and creating a lot more stress, sort of going back to the Christine Armstrong episode we talked about, just adding more fuel to it, there's a way to actually sort of calm down and improve the fire through dialogue and conversation, rather than having a shouting match, or a keyboard shouting match, as maybe it was in this situation. And there's so much polarization going on right now, but for the most part, is it really needed or necessary? I just think, sometimes there's a need to have a bold and open discussion, but so many things can just be, we're British, can just be sorted over just a calm cup of tea. And many people just just so angry to just pour more fuel on the fire. So I think Christine's episode, even though we're talking about Will's, is actually a great way of dealing with that. But Will was the perfect example of how to actually, rather than talk about theory, apply it in practice.
Yes, it's interesting actually, isn't it? Yeah, Christine very much went into the psychology of why you need to react like this for yourself, but then Will was talking about it in practice, which is a good example, as you said. And I think, that's a really good way to end the show. So if you've got a disagreement with a loved one, with a colleague, with a family member, call them up, have a conversation, or even better, like Tom said, have a cup of tea with them and breathe before you go there, be calm and just have a conversation. Don't get offended. People disagree on things. It's not a big deal. That's the main takeaway, really. Like always, if you've got any feedback for us, leave it in the comments, and subscribe to us on YouTube, and of course across all the podcast platforms. And then we will see you next week for another episode of The Cosmic Bridge.